So welcome, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today to hear about the amazing contributions of Alfred Bader and the Bader Philanthropies to Queen's University. My name is Jeremy Heil. I am the Digital and Private Records Archivist at Queen's University Archives, and I will start us off this afternoon. I will be followed by Swen Steinberg and then Daniel Woolf afterwards, and then we will leave it open for questions, and we'll probably have some conversation as well. And this is a nice tight group, so really feel free to, if you have questions, to let us know what you're thinking. So, of course, before I begin, I would like to acknowledge that we are situated on the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabe. I engage in this recognition not in some sort of rote exercise, but rather in acknowledgement that my ancestors and my progeny's activities have an impact on the land and the people. And I hope that from me onward, at a minimum, that we continue to respect all that has been entrusted to us and honor the treaties in both spirit and letter. So I would like to start the conversation today with a look at how Alfred Bader's own records donated to Queen's University Archives in 2020 were digitized and made available in support of broader scholarship. So I'll take us back a little bit to the early days of what digitization looked like in Queen's University Archives. Just before I started here in 2021, or 2001, not 2021, it's been a lot longer than that. We had our first scanner, and there was a small digitization project to put up an exhibit online. It's still there if you wish to go look at it today, the archival look at World War I. And the scanner worked well enough. We had a single computer on which to hold our materials and a CD drive where we could burn these digitized materials to CD to hold them, supposedly in perpetuity. How many people have a CD writer anymore, or reader, or anything? No? Yeah. Didn't last that long, did it? So anyway, over the years, we've had to grow our infrastructure. And we've been trying to purchase more materials, initially through grant funding, where we could. For digitization projects, we'd be able to purchase scanners, we'd be able to purchase an assortment of material, and then we were able to get some large format scanners for the much larger images and for maps and plans, and then specialized equipment for digitizing photographic negatives. As we joined the library in 2012, we gained more access to sustained infrastructure for digitization, and this allowed us to purchase things like the overhead scanner that you see in the top left corner there. And this significantly sped the process of digitizing entire files of records at a time. It also further allowed us to fill the gaps in digitization through the purchase of specialized equipment, especially for a wide variety of video and audio formats. So we basically, as you can see in the center, have to maintain a museum of this equipment, things that you would never otherwise see anywhere else, because we have all of these formats in our collections, and we have to be able to access them just for viewing. But it's also great to be able to digitize them too, and then put them online, since people can't necessarily view a Betamax or a U-matic tape, if you know what any of those are. Even VHS, right? Anyone still have a VHS player? No? I do. Still have VHSs. Anyway. So we engage in digitization activities for several reasons, including fulfillment of reference requests, preparation of exhibitions, or preservation efforts when materials may be too fragile to handle. But the main reason we digitize is for access. Which brings us to the Digital Alfred Bader project. So we received funding in September of 2021 to the tune of $25,000 from Bader Philanthropies. And this was mainly to digitize the entirety of Alfred Bader's records that had been donated to Queen's University Archives. So once we've digitized that was 1,122 files containing over 116,000 records done in 2021. We hired a digital Alfred Bader intern. Her name was Rihanna Wood from May to August of 2023. And the work that Rihanna conducted on the papers as she was working through the digital files was so inspiring that it actually prompted her to go to library school to study archives. So where she's finishing her final year of her master's right now, which is really amazing. We love hearing those stories. In fact, we've had a couple of those come through Queen's Archives. And then the funding also supported Swen in the annual archives lecture that he gave in November of 2021. So we sent the boxes down to University of Toronto, who house a service point for the Internet Archive. And this is a very cost-effective way for us to scan large projects. And in fact, we have made use of this in the past for a number of digital humanities projects, one of which was the papers of George Wally, which we also hold. And the project that was funded through SSHRC by a faculty member not here at Queen's, at Algoma University, so the digital records were used for textual analysis and such. So this is another reason why we digitize, or why we would want to digitize materials, because it can be used for a lot more than just access and being able to see what's in the records and just for research. We also had digitized the entirety of the genealogical files of Dr. H.C. Burley. So we had visits numerous times throughout the summer of various genealogists coming through to see specifically these files on United Empire Loyalists. And since then, we've had almost no one step into our archives. But if you take a look at the numbers online of how many people have accessed those files, it's astronomical. We've had quite a few people look at them. So the additional benefit and the ability to limit of using the Internet Archive is our ability to sort of limit access. So when these files were scanned for Alfred Bader's papers, there's still some material in there that maybe shouldn't be available to every researcher. You know, a couple of maybe privileged information. Every once in a while, a check or something like that, because, you know, he spent some money on some artwork. So, and this was important, of course. It's important to know what it was he was buying, because we were able to take these restricted records and provide limited access to the curators at the Agnes, who were then able to track the provenance of a number of the pieces that were donated to their collections. And then we were able to provide access to Leslie Heinrichs, who was the Bader family archivist, and she pinpointed certain areas that we should maybe pull out the pages or redact some information, which is what our digital Bader intern did. She went through and then removed the information that was highlighted for her, and then she was able to put it up online in a public forum, which brings us to the Queen's University Library Digital Collections portal. So post-cleanup, we could transfer the files for public viewing here, and this particular portal was launched in January 2022 and serves as the main access point for digitized materials from the archives, maps, special collections, and other units of the library. So you can go look at this right now at that address down below and glance through all of the files of Alfred Bader today. We also make these available through our database. So we've listed all of these at the file level. You can see the arrangement that he maintained. So you can gather the context of the information. There's more details about what you can find in each of the records. And then once we've digitized all of these, we can reuse them or do something more with them. So we like to enhance the objects themselves. And this is one of the services we use called From the Page, which allows us to post materials and then have people transcribe them, especially handwritten materials. And we can use this. So this particular example here is Alfred's internment diary. I won't get too much into that because someone else will be speaking about that. From here, once we transcribed it, or once it was transcribed, we were able to export the text and then send it to a translator who then translated it, because as you can see, it's in German. So take it from the German, move it to the English, and then we have the final resting place of it on our digital collections page with a transcript and the translation alongside it, so that you can download that to be able to read it for yourselves. So, with that quick description of the digitization process surrounding Alfred Bader's records, I would like to pass it on to Sven.
My name is Swen Steinberg. I'm a historian, and I teach at the Department of History and the School of Religion, and I'm affiliated with the German Historical Institute in Washington and Berkeley. And as a historian, so I will talk a little bit more about the content of this particular source. As a historian, I've long been intrigued by the intersection of migration and knowledge, with a specific emphasis on the transitional experiences of migrants in transit, as well as the unique challenges faced by young migrants. I've been leading these 3 international standing working groups since 2018, in total including more than 300 international scholars, and with a particular focus in my case on the history of unaccompanied minor refugees. As you can imagine, this group of refugees is difficult to study, especially when it comes to finding sources directly produced by these children and young people, sources that are not administrative records, school documents or materials from charitable organizations, and don't get me wrong, they are very interesting and very important as well. But my angle is different, because this challenge is closely linked to a long-standing issue in both historical childhood studies and migration research. In what context and to what extent do young migrants have agency, and how and where is this agency expressed? Identifying primary sources that illuminate these questions is very difficult, but however, here at Queen's University, where I'm doing research and teach since 2018, I found exactly one of these sources and what I was looking for, because I was fortunate to have the opportunity to work with an exceptional source created by a young refugee in a transit situation, and this is the internment diary of Alfred from 1941, that is here in Kingston at Queen's Archives. And I will speak first about this source in particular, and in the second part I will focus not so much on the digitization of this source, but more on public history perspectives that are connected to this kind of digitization projects. In February 1941, Jewish refugee Alfred Bader started writing a diary in the Canadian internment Camp 1, Île Noire, which is Fort Lennox. He had arrived in England in late 1938 as an unaccompanied Kindertransport child fleeing Nazi persecution from Vienna. After being interned as an enemy alien in May 1940 on the Isle of Man, Bader was deported to Canada in July 1940 and interned south of Montreal with over 270 young, predominantly Jewish male refugees. This diary, which has only been known to a wider public since 2022, is unusual in many ways. Just for the basics, the diary covers 21 weeks of his internment and has 30 entries, in total 37 pages. And you can see the handwriting of 16-year-old Alfred here in the first entry from February 1941 on this slide. Bader documented everyday life from the perspective of an internee. Comparison with his autobiography, Adventures of a Chemist Collector, published in 1995, reveals aspects of censorship and self-censorship in this source that are maybe not so much surprising. This resonates with the language he was using, mainly German. As for conflicts or administrative questions, when it comes to the camp administration, English. Regarding his spiritual life, Hebrew, and of course there is a lot of Viennese slang in there as well. And as you can imagine, I had long conversations with the translator, because those were the very tricky parts. The everyday life covered included aspects such as food, labor, weather conditions, information from the outside world, friendships, and of course soccer, besides collecting stamps, one of his favorite hobbies, but also acts of self-empowerment regarding the camp management and, for example, the violence of individual guards. This highlights the transitional aspect of Bader's experience represented in this source. Like many other young internees, he was indeed deprived of his agency, but reclaimed it at the same time. In a conscious decision, he pursued school qualifications, identifying education as a way out of his transit situation. The diary ends by the end of July 1941, when Bader could leave the internment camp to enlist at a Canadian university, and that was here at Queen's, where he arrived on November 15, 1941. Beder's diary not only documents his growing up in a state of in-betweenness, but also his relationship to his Jewish heritage and Jewish culture within this Canadian internment camp. His aunt and stepmother, Gisela Reich, played a central role in many entries in his diary, and he maintained contact with her in Vienna until she was deported to Theresienstadt concentration camp and murdered there in 1942. Furthermore, some passages of the diary reveal, in my opinion, an epistemological practice, with the tone often shifting from informal to formal. And these formal passages about general events in everyday camp life or Alfred's progress in education were likely included in the correspondence he mentions throughout the diary, so he used text blocks to just copy-paste and to save time. So now that I have provided some background on the source and its context, I would like to shift the focus to the second part of my presentation. So beyond contemporary questions or research questions, I'm interested in this in relation to unaccompanied minor refugees. So digitized sources like these are useful in many different fields, and one of this is public history. It might not surprise you that as a historian, I argue that history, and more precisely historical knowledge, matters, and so does the stability of educational institutions. Alfred Beder knew this as well. He was also holding a history degree from Queen's and supported it in an exceptional way, arts and science, and the critical thinking about the relation of past and present, about the question in what society we want to live in 5, 10 or 15 years. So I mentioned his internment a couple of times, and the transit situation, again, for him, education was the exit door to end this transit and to regain agency. And this is what this diary is also about. But it is much more than that. And I just want to come up with 3 public history examples, or at least 2, starting with one of them already here on Queen's campus. So we organized an exhibition in 2021 about refugees in Queen's history, and Alfred Beder was already there, not his diary, because we didn't know, or I didn't know. But we already told his story included into a broader context of forced migration here at Queen's, and I come up with this example because what you see here is his internment shirt. That is also at Queen's Archives. So we have a very interesting object here as well that is directly linked to this written source at this time. So, but again, this diary is a little bit more than just a historical source, and I brought 2 examples from public history where I was already able to implement this open access digital source. The Moses Mendelssohn Center for European Jewish Studies in Potsdam, Germany, started some time ago the online platform History of the German Jewish Diaspora, and I was invited to write an introduction to Alfred Beder's diary and in relation to teaching about forced migration and transit at universities. So the digital diary is accessible anyway, and what we are doing there is we develop teaching material, but again for university students. Second, I would like to introduce the Remapping Refugee Stories project at the University of Vienna. I could contribute to in the last year. The idea behind this project is to visualize the global dimension of fleeing Nazi persecution, including all aspects such as gender, age, and class. This is interestingly also linked to Queen's University and to the Department of History, not just through me. One of the principal investigators is Werner Nell, a retired professor from Germany who had a close relation to Queen's over decades. And he was a scholar in residence at the Department of History last fall. So this is all somehow connected. Besides other biographies, for example, another one from Queens, Hans Eigner, I also contributed Alfred Bader's story. If you are interested in this website, it's already online. The official launch is this Wednesday. I can circulate the link. It is of course in Vienna, but it's also streamed online, so I will be there online. And you are invited to play around with this. You can really move the globe. You can zoom in, zoom out. There are 26 different refugee biographies, and the idea is to visualize the global dimension of forced migration. And what you can see there is Alfred Bader's route across the globe. But it's not just this. The individual biographies come also with pedagogical material for different school forms and ages of students. And here Alfred Bader's open access diary will be implemented into the classroom, and what forced migration meant in the past and what it probably means in the present. So again, not just a diary and one person. Thanks a lot.
And so I don't have any kind of a fancy PowerPoint like Sven, but I think my brief was different. And it's simply to talk about Alfred the man as I came to know him during my 10 years as principal. And I have a few little anecdotes, but told to keep this to about 7 minutes. I probably could talk for an hour on the subject. Obviously, as a Queen's alum, I was conscious of Alfred Bader's existence because you pretty much couldn't open an alumni review issue without seeing some new story on Alfred or Alfred and Isabel and his many gifts to the university. So I started being aware of him and a little bit about his background fairly soon after I graduated from Queen's in 1980, little imagining I would ever actually meet the man. And I was appointed as principal in February of 2009. I didn't start the job till the following September. But within, I would say, about 3 days of the announcement, I was back in Edmonton, where I was at the time, and I had an email from Judith Brown at Advancement, who many of you will know, saying, Dr. Bader wants to talk to you right away. And I knew enough to know that saying, well, you know, I'm too busy and I've got my current day job was probably not an advisable idea with something like Alfred. And genuinely, I did actually want to chat to him. I was told 2 things. One, be very punctual. Alfred hates lateness. I kind of hate it too, so I thought, okay, you know, I think we're going to get along. Also, please address him as Dr. Bader. And I tend to be a little bit formal about that, so I do say that, you know, no problem, my elder, and so forth. So we had a very amicable phone call between Edmonton and Milwaukee. And Alfred wanted to know a little bit about my background. He was pleased because the word was already out in the street that Queen's had appointed its first Jewish principal. And the conversation, first of all, he said, do call me Alfred, so great, we got that out of the way. And he had 2 concerns. One, that I not sell the castle, and 2, that I not sell the art. And as many of you will not know that Queen's was in relatively dire financial circumstances after the crash and the whole collapse of the money markets in 2008-9, and big deficit. Happily, we don't have those issues anymore. So I think from his perspective, it was a legitimate worry. The castle had always been, you know, in terms of paying its own way, a little bit on the brink. And my answer was very simple. I said, look, I haven't even started the job yet, but I can tell you that one of the things we have to preserve about the university are things that are distinctive about the university. And unless somebody can show me that a whole bunch of other universities have a castle and that a whole bunch of other universities have an art collection like this, that selling those off pretty much would not be my first or even my 500th measure. So he was, I think, mollified by that. We then talked a little bit about religion. He asked sort of what branch of Judaism. He was very Orthodox. I'm not. He didn't like being referred to as Jewish, which sounded like it was an adjective. He said, no, you should just say you're a Jew. And I said, okay, fine. but so then I set about, after the call, reading his autobiographies to make sure I knew the man. They were actually very, very interesting, and I'm sure they don't tell the whole story. In fact, I know they don't tell the whole story because when I read the diary transcription last week, preparing for this talk, I was struck by the number of things that I didn't know about Alfred from reading that. And one of those was that despite the immense fortune he made as a chemist and his great success here in engineering chemistry and then afterwards at Harvard, he was actually a duffer at chemistry in school. The diary is full of his struggles in, when he was studying for the big set of exams, the matura or the general matriculation, of how he did this and this and this and this. Well in this study, well in that study, but chemistry. And I thought, well, good on him. I mean, he goes from that being his weakest subject to picking that as a career and excelling. As I said to my colleagues before this started, I cannot imagine my having said, after high school, I know I got a 72 in algebra, but by golly, I'm going to become a mathematician. It just wasn't going to happen. So I met with Alfred several times during the 9 years. He actually died about halfway through my final year as principal. We saw each other, I would say, at least once a year. Normally it was here until about 2014 or 15. And at that point, he was getting a little bit too elderly to travel, so I started traveling to Milwaukee to see him, usually in the company of Judith Brown, who has been just an invaluable connection with the family, and everything to do with the Baders goes through Judith. And the visits were generally pleasant. His last major event here, and the time I think that I saw him happiest, was at the opening of the Isabel 10 years ago in the fall of 2014. Isabel was with him, of course, for whom the facility is named, his two sons, grandchildren, and so forth. I know Daniel Bader a bit, the younger son, because he was on the board of trustees through roughly half of my time. But it was a great event, and Alfred was really, really in an up mood. And he was a very generous man, but he was also an extremely thrifty man. He had no use for, I would say, the trappings of wealth. His house in Milwaukee was pleasant, but very ordinary. No Mar-a-Lago there. And the money was all in the art. And similarly, when he sent us money, one would frequently get either him showing up personally, just pressing a check in your hand, or you would get a brown envelope with 12 10-cent stamps on it, manually put on there. No couriers. Didn't believe in couriers. So I think that bespeaks the generation that he was from, which was very much my parents' generation. And my mother actually was a wartime refugee as well, who was sent here from England during the Blitz, which is how I actually ended up coming back to Canada early in my childhood. He was, if you recall the Coen brothers movie from a few years ago, A Serious Man, if anybody has actually seen that. It's a movie, it's a title I think very much describes Alfred. Yeah, you would get the occasional joke and you would get the occasional smile, but he was very, very serious about what he did. He was obviously very serious about his business. He was very serious about his art, what he liked, what he didn't like. And he had strong views on a number of subjects. Religion was one, art was another, chemistry was a third. And I would say his interests included, as he said, his ABCs, art, Bible, chemistry. I would add to that the I, which was Isabel, who was very much the love of his life and very much a support to him. And on my last visit to Milwaukee, which was about 3 months before Alfred died, and he was barely able to speak, I could just see how much Isabel had cared for him and just how much of a support she was for him. So, what did I learn from the diary? Well, I've already mentioned the chemistry thing. Some things I suspected, his strong views against liberalizing Judaism, which were very much not my views on the subject, but that was fine. Obviously took shape as early on as when he was in the camp. And I was not aware or had forgotten about his close friendship, which it somehow struck me as a very un-Alfredic kind of thing, with Pong, if you have read the diary. And I just learned before this started that he was able to track Pong down later in life. Unfortunately, Pong had already died, but just shows how much of an impression that made. So definitely a very interesting man, very serious man, very generous man, and I think it's just fantastic that we've got this archive, this whole font of his material, because it is a remarkable story. And to close off, if I had a dime for the number of times I got to tell the story about how he came to Queens and how Jean Royce, who he revered, let him in, and how McGill in Toronto wouldn't let him in, and the rest is history. If I had a dime for all of those, we would probably, I would say, have 3 more buildings and 27 more faculty. It was just such a wonderful story to tell. So my congratulations to the archives and to Swen for getting this off the ground. I'm sure it's going to have many users, and I think I'll leave it there.
It's funny. Now, at this point, we said that we were going to have a conversation. Then our question is, what is our conversation about? What I'm going to do first, though, I think it might be useful since we have some people in the crowd. Maybe we'll start the conversation. If any of you have any questions or thoughts, I know that there's a few of you that have looked at the papers and have done things like that. Maybe I'll give it a couple of seconds to see if anyone has any thoughts. Yes, Ken.
Sorry, covering from a cold. So I will say that this document was obviously very precious. I received it, I believe it was 2022. Isabel Bader had sent it. It was one of the last things she did before she passed. So it was still in transit with Judith Brown. It arrived after Isabel passed. So to kick us off, I was wondering, a survival of a document like this, Swen, from this period, how common or uncommon is something like that?
It is uncommon, that's for sure. I mean, I'm doing research on this specific refugee group since a couple of years. What I have learned is you have to be very patient. Documents like these are out there, but they are really hard to find. So we are talking about individual letters, documents like these. Sometimes school material is interesting, because there are side notes or anything like that where you can let's say, come a little bit closer to the person that you identified in one of these transit situations. Such a diary is, I don't think I have another one so far from this period of time. And especially not such an extensive one. So it sounds like not very extensive when I say 37 pages, but the amount and the density of information that is in there is incredible. And I was at Fort Lennox, of course. I was in contact before with them, and they were blown away. Because they simply don't have something like that for this period of time. They have, of course, memoirs. There's oral history. There have been interviews conducted with former internees. We have those kind of sources as well available, but sources that are really from this period, from in this case about a year where this camp where this camp existed. I didn't see anything like that. And again, they were really surprised that something like this is out there.
This one's working. There we go. It took a while to warm up. Actually, it's sort of what you were just talking about here sort of brought to mind another question. And would be for both of you, actually, as historians, and those who, if you may have worked with primary sources before, and you spoke of having memoirs available versus a diary. And I know that certainly from an archival perspective, when we teach about archives, we talk about why they're important to the study of history over secondary sources, of the removal of certain I guess, editorial choices, perhaps, right? Or just the removal of interpretation that's there. And I wonder if either of you could speak to that from your studies of how important a diary would be, say, versus even Alfred's memoirs. And you alluded to it as well during your talk, that there were things that you saw that had been omitted. And I don't know if you wish to both speak to that.
I've made use of both diaries and autobiographies / memoirs over the years, mainly from the 16th and 17th centuries, and they tell you different things. Clearly, a memoir or autobiography is something that is shaped later by memory and by all the experiences that the subject has lived through subsequently. And whereas a diary is, if you like, something recorded in real time. And I actually don't subscribe to the view that one is superior to the other. I think they actually give different perspectives on the events, because obviously there is the advantage of immediacy and accuracy of memory in something recorded by the day, and that is a little bit less trustworthy in a memoir or autobiography written 20, 30, 40, 50 years later. On the other hand, the thing that's written in the day lacks the context of how the event turned out, of its particular significance in wider events, the context, if you like, and that is something you do get from autobiographies and memoirs. So the ideal situation, to be honest, is you actually have both, which in this case we do with Alfred's material, and I'll be, quite struck to see that there are some differences between the two.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks so much. So same on my side. So in my teaching, I generally work with both. So there are always primary sources included, and then it depends on the topic. This could be everything, and this could be something like this diary or memoirs. I think memoirs are also helpful from another perspective, because students learn a lot about storytelling, and how people later on interpreted their own biography. So in a refugee lecture course, I'm reading with the student Madeleine Albright's memoirs, who has been a refugee twice. Very interesting story, but this is also a very good example. This memoir, the tone when she starts describing her professional career as a politician, changes entirely. It's getting entirely unpersonal, and is really focused on her achievement. In her case, there are a lot of achievements on the international level in international politics, and this is something you can easily discuss with students as well. Just to come back to the beta diary, I will definitely do exactly this. I will include the diary into my teaching together with his autobiography, and in this case, this chapter about the internment. Because this is also interesting to see. So there are a lot of similarities. He obviously used this diary to write this chapter. So there is a lot from the diary in there. So therefore, the diary had kind of this a purpose as well, to at some point not just memorialize it, but also to memorize it, and this is what is happening. But the question is also what is not in there, and so aspects like violence. I was honestly shocked when I was reading the autobiography. I was reading this first, and then I was looking into the autobiography. I've read this a couple of years ago, and I didn't remember in detail, but I was really shocked what is not in this diary, and this is something you can easily discuss with students, and it's of course helpful. Last but not least, it comes with the message that history is interpretation.
Thinking as you said that, Sven, I teach a second-year historiography course every couple of years or so as one of the course seminars, and I think it would be a very interesting exercise to have students read the bits from the autobiography that are about the internment experience, and then read the diary and have them write up an analysis of what's in one and not in the other, and what looks different to Alfred circa 1990 or whenever he wrote the memoir from what it looked like to 19-year-old Alfred.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yes, go ahead. You know what? I'm going to bring the microphone out there so people can hear too. Also for the here.
Hello, my name is Brooke. I'm the processing technician in the archive. So I processed the most recent collection that we got from Alfred Bader. And I removed all of the staples from the original accession that we got from Alfred Bader so it could be sent to be digitized. So my question is, how is the ability for you to research changed by having collections like this digitized?
That's a very good question. I don't know.
It's more yours here.
It's more yours. Of course, it changed a lot. So that's quite for sure. And I don't have to explain you this, but during COVID, it was extremely helpful that some institutions like archives are pretty much on the way since a couple of years when it comes to digitization, and COVID even more so pushed into this direction. But what I always say, a digitized source is not coming with the same experience than seeing it as the original document in the original setting and in the archive. Not to mention that sometimes something is missing. There is sometimes a note on the backside that is not scanned, for example, and this is something you have to keep in mind. So you cannot prevent this, and when you are working with digitized sources, for example, and the originals are in Australia and you don't have travel funding, then of course you work with exactly this. But it made access to information and to historical analysis most definitely much more easy. One last point. So I was with my students last fall with a course in the Douglas Library in the special collections, and also in the archive. And one of the messages I wanted them to learn is only a very small percentage of what in this institution is on stacks is even digitized. So this is what you have to keep in mind. It's not because many things are in the internet, not everything is there. So that comes with this kind of learning outcome that just relying on digital sources narrows our focus and narrows the message, our analysis of the past. So this is kind of the disadvantage I see, but this is something we can teach. This is something we can discuss with the students.
Yeah, I don't work on these particular materials myself, but I think Sven's last point, I think, bears emphasizing. Many people, when they find out I'm a historian and ask, are you going away on your sabbatical? I said, no, most of what I have to work on is here. So yeah, I guess pretty much everything is online now, and I have to say, well, no. When I say everything that I need is right here, it's because I'm principally an intellectual historian and I work on text more than archives these days. And as a matter of fact, it is a myth that everything is online. It's not even close to everything. And that does lead to certain problems. One of our PhD grads, Ian Milligan, published a book about 4 years ago with Cambridge on doing history in the digital age. And one of the key arguments of that, it's a fairly short book, one of the key arguments of that is that and he's as digitally oriented a historian as you will ever meet, is that one succumbs to the illusion that when you search through using various online search tools and so forth, databases and so forth, you are likely to be misled by an illusion of completeness, and there is a bias in terms of what gets put online first, what doesn't. Certain newspapers of certain political views are online and certain others are not. And so researchers, I think, have to be cautious. That said, I know from my own memory of being a first-year graduate student at Oxford in 1980 that I spent 3 or 4 months craned over a card catalog, what is called the short title catalog of English books, chronologically arranged, while I developed a subject for my thesis. And I don't think my back has ever recovered from that. It's work that took me 4 or 5 months of my first year, and which now could be done in, I would say, probably 3 or 4 minutes with online. So there's definite benefits, but also some limitations.
I just wanted to make a quick comment on the nature of digital. I'm glad you mentioned Ian, because I've worked with Ian quite a bit on the digital side, because he's done a lot of work on web archives. Yep. Of course, which has been very vital to all of our work in archives and for historians as well. I just wanted to reiterate a bit of what Sven said and what Daniel said too, that by all means, like, we have barely scratched the surface. Mm-hmm. If I say that we have 0.00001% of the archives digitized, I might be exaggerating, because we just have that much more to go. And absolutely, it's like where funding exists. So you have the Bader Philanthropies that were able to fund the digitization of the entirety of their phone. And that is very rare. So unless you have money to go along with it, it doesn't get done. But even then, going back to what Sven said of like being able to see it in person, what you're missing are things like watermarks. Like, you don't always catch absolutely everything in a digital version. Being able to see like something like a coffee stain on a piece of paper, or like the folds in a piece of paper. Were the folds really well worn? That would indicate that it's been opened and closed many times. So it had a more vital interest to the creator or to the holder of that particular document, versus something that was pristine, printed, and thrown into a file to be forgotten forever. No, it's in the archives. It's not forgotten forever. It's still there. But there's an awful lot that you have to consider when you're working with archival material. And we will never digitize everything. Not to mention the fact it's really costly to hold on to it after that, because then you have terabytes of files that have to be stored in perpetuity. So
And I don't know if this is an issue for relatively modern collections like Bader Phone, but paleographic issues come in when you're dealing with older archives, even if they're online, because the best photograph in the world online of some very difficult 17th century secretary hand or court hand will actually be problematic to transcribe sometimes. Moreover, just to go to your point of just fine details, you might miss the fact that the hand is slightly shakier on this day than it was on the previous day, or indeed with some late medieval, early modern manuscripts that the hand has actually changed.
Yes.
Yeah.
I will say the problem with Alfred stuff is that a lot of it's on like photo paper, and it's a lot of it very hard to read. And he kept every single sheet saying that the fax went through, stapled to the letter that he sent. So there's a lot of staple removal and fax sheets to go through.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I don't know if you should come to the archive sometime to see if you can actually make out what a lot of things on fax paper, like early or late 90s, early 2000s fax paper looks like. Because wow, does that ever fade fast?